Good afternoon. I'm Linda Baker, the Learning Director at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. On behalf of the Learning Network team, I would like to welcome everyone. Today, the Learning Network spotlight is on human trafficking, and in particular, on two innovative responses created by and for youth and Indigenous communities. I'm located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and Attawandaron peoples. These lands are connected with the London Township and Sombra treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to society. We are honored that Elders Dan and Mary Lou Smoke are with us today. Elder Mary Lou Smoke is a gifted writer, singer, guitarist, and traditional drummer who generously shares her talents with her community. Elder Dan Smoke is active in many areas of community life as a traditional knowledge carrier, community activist, and cultural teacher. Both Mary Lou and Dan have served as cultural counselors and visiting elder for a number of colleges, universities, and organizational service providers. I now invite Dan and Mary Lou Smoke to open this resource spotlight.
Miigwech, Linda. Where I come from, when we greet one another, we say bonjour. So bonjour.
Bonjour.
Asanyinas kwe and dejnakas makwa dodam bachwanabe dunjaba. I just shared my spirit name with you. I'm Bear Clan, and I originally come from Batchewana Bay, Ontario, which is a beautiful Lake Superior. And I'm very honored to share some of the teachings that I've learned throughout my lifetime. And most of that time I've spent walking with Dan. We met in Toronto close to 50 years ago. We've been married for 44 years, but we lived together for 5 years before that because that's what the hippies did way back then. And so we have been on this spiritual odyssey together. And we have been sitting with the elders and attending ceremonies, sitting side by side, absorbing the knowledge and learning from the elders. Like there's a lot of elders who like to share. And if you get an opportunity, you should take that time to spend with them, because when they leave here, they take that sacred knowledge with them. And I know when I go, hopefully in at least 30 years or more, when I go to the spirit world, I want to be able to have taught a lot of people songs because I love to sing. And so we're going to open up with a opening song in a few moments, but Dan's going to introduce himself.
Good. Yahweh, Chimiigwech Marilu.
Oh.
Beautiful words. Asaninas and Dishnakas, Kildare, Dodam, Six Nations, Grand River, Ginjaba. So my spirit name is Asaninas. I was given that name in the Onondaga Longhouse, of which I'm a lifetime member. I come from the Six Nations Grand River Territory, and my clan, my family, is the Kildare bird family, member of the sandpiper bird family, actually. Anyways, so I'm very honored to be part of this panel today. I'm really looking forward to hearing our panelists. I always learn so much. Mary Lou and I, we are very fortunate that we get to hear from academic, activists, educators, public educators, as well as the traditional teachers that we have spent a lot of time with. So now we're listening to our contemporary people like our guests today, Collin and Marissa, and I'm really looking forward to it, because I learned so much from them. It's like listening to the elders, hey, Mary Lou?
Yes, we're always learning throughout our lifetime. And so it's important that we learn about the teachings of our people. In the old day, before the non-native people came here, our people were very community minded. the whole community would raise one child. So everybody would pitch in and help in a way, that was helpful to the child. If they recognized that the child could do something really well, then they would, set the child up with the aunt or uncle that could help them, do better in that process, whatever it was. So we always had that community involvement. And so these days, a lot of us are living in cities and we don't have those connections anymore. So we always have to be careful when we're out there, like walking at night. I never go out by myself because I never know what's going to happen. And so I'm always trying to like take care of myself as well as helping my other sisters, and I'm always telling them, make sure you're in a safe place, make sure that you're aware of your surroundings. But our teachings have been a part of this land since the beginning of time. And the most important one, I believe, is the one about the water, because the water is the lifeblood of our mother, the earth. When we're in our mother's belly, we're surrounded by water. And as we grow, that water protects us. And when it's time for us to be born, that water cleanses away and we come out into the world. And from that time on, we need pure, clean water to survive. Women are in harmony with the moon, and women are also in harmony with the water. We're also in harmony with the earth. And that's why when we have our ceremonies, we always wear long gowns or long skirts. And so when the skirts touch the ground, that we're reminded about that harmony. So we always have our moon ceremonies. And so it's a time when we gather and we share with each other the beauty of the moon, the beauty of being women, and the beauty of the ceremony. So we always sing the water song. And I know that some people know this song, but there's a lot of people who don't know this song. It's on YouTube. If you can't remember it from today, just key in my name, Mary Lou Smoke. And I'm singing there at Harbourfront in Toronto a few years ago. So this is the water song. Wichita, do ya, do ya, do ya. Wichita, do ya, do ya, hey. Wichita, do ya, do ya, do ya. Wichita, do ya, do ya, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Wichita, do ya, do ya, do ya. Wichita, do ya, do ya, hey. Wichita, do ya, do ya, do ya. Wichita, do ya, do ya, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Wichita, do ya, do ya, do ya. Wichita, do ya, do ya, hey. Wichita, do ya, do ya, do ya. Wichita, do ya, do ya, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Wichita, do ya, do ya, do ya. Wichita, do ya, do ya, hey. Wichita, do ya, do ya, do ya. Wichita, do ya, do ya, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Hey, Achanaya, hey, hey. Oh, Matakiwasa.
All
right.
Now we're at Chimigachmarilu.
Oh, you got to
Beautiful,
now.
beautiful song.
Dan will say a short opening address.
Oh, Chimigachmarilu. Yes, Yahweh, Saguandizo, Miguachki Jamanedo, Bindigan, Mishomas, Sanillo, Esquatahas, Kitquantanwa, Wahase, Chawise Dodaqua, Oscata Nagohas, Oida Nahas. Basically, what I just said was I want to give thanks for this beautiful, beautiful Wanishleo, this beautiful day that we've been blessed with on this special day to have this webinar. We've been blessed with all creation. We gave greetings and we gave thanks when the sun rose. As the sun, our eldest brother, the sun was rising. We were out, there were some people actually with a sacred fire offering their tobacco to give thanks and to give greetings for another day. We also want to acknowledge the water. Mary Lou talked about the water, all the life that lives in the water, all the life that lives on the water. We talked about Mother Earth. Mother Earth is that other feminine sacred element of life that all creation needs in order to survive. So we want to acknowledge the crawlers, the four-leggeds, the two-leggeds, the plants, the medicines, the rocks, the minerals, the trees, all the life that lives in the trees, all the life that lives on the trees, the flyers, for they are all part of an interdependent, interrelated life support system that continues to take care of our mother, the earth. So we just want to acknowledge grandfather, grandmother, our father sky. Our father sky also represents the air, breathes that life into all creation. Nothing would survive without our father sky, Mother Earth, or the water, the lifeblood of our Mother Earth. We also want to acknowledge our eldest brother, the sun, who represents fire. Fire. As our eldest brother travels across the sky from the eastern door to the western door, he shines his face upon us. And when he does, he provides us with heat and he provides us with light each and every day. So grandfather, grandmother, we give greetings, we give thanks that our eldest brother is still following his sacred instructions. Grandfather, grandmother, so be it in our minds. And then we acknowledge our grandmother Moon that Mary Lou spoke about. She continues to look after all female life. Nothing would survive without our grandmother Moon. So we also acknowledge our star relatives. We recognize the thunder beings who have very important responsibilities of waking up Earth, and the cycle of creation begins usually around the thunder moon time of February, March. We also recognize the four protectors. They are the spiritual beings, the spirit helpers, the spiritual beings that look after all spiritual matters, celestial. So we want to acknowledge also that we all have these spirit helpers that are helping guide us, so that we have a spiritual guidance system based upon our faith and our belief. So grandfather, grandmother, we acknowledge that this is intact, and that we hope that everyone is still being able to hear and listen to that side. Oftentimes we call it our intuition, and the intuition is a good term because it does accurately reflect our listening to our spirit helpers. And lastly, we want to acknowledge Sagwan Diesel, Dijaminado, the creator, the maker of our bodies. The creator has put us here where we are in the Great Lakes watershed because everything we need to survive is right here. We don't have to go anywhere else. We don't have to go down to the southwest. We don't have to go to the west coast. We don't have to go to outer space because everything is right here. And we were taught that whenever we want all of this that has been put here, the life forms, and we want it to come back and repopulate with a stronger gene pool every generation, then all we have to do is give thanks. And that's why we gather in the longhouse, in the Daywan lodges, in the roundhouses. That's why we sit down and give thanksgiving for all creation. And we continue to do that and have that reverence for all creation. So grandfather, grandmother, in the spirit of our ancestors, we say, Miigwech, Ulalan, Tapwe, Masicho, Hishka, Siam, Wopila, Pilamaya, Tapwe, Anishik, Yahweh, grandfather, grandmother, all my relations, Daneto, hi hi.
We'll turn it back over to Linda.
Thank you so much, Mary Lou and Dan. On behalf of everyone participating in this resource spotlight, thank you for that wonderful opening. It is my pleasure to tell you a little bit about our accomplished speakers. And right now we have over 1,200 people already that have joined the webinar, and over 2,000 people registered and will visit the recording at another time. So I think it tells you again just how concerned people are about this issue and how much they would like to learn about the programs that our two speakers are going to talk about. Marissa Kokkoros is the founder and executive director of Aura Freedom International. From her time in sub-Saharan Africa, India, Nepal, Italy, Eastern Europe, and Canada, Marissa has studied the social position of women and girls in different places and the communities surrounding them. She has spent extensive time researching and documenting human trafficking and gender-based violence around the world, and has implemented empowerment projects with women in different countries. Marissa's passion is watching the ripple effects of placing knowledge and power into the hands of women and girls. Collin Graham is from Okacha Webegio Ainging Ojibwe First Nation. He grew up in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Collin has been an advocate in community development for over 20 years. Collin currently works at the Ontario Native Women's Association, ONWA to many of us, as a community development manager. He is a huge advocate for the youth and empowers the 2S LGBTQ community through experiential learning. Collin is passionate about deconstructing colonialism at different levels through community, as well as on an individual basis. Now I'm pleased to turn over the platform to Marissa.
Thank you so much, Linda. And I'm just going to make sure I am playing this in full screen. Can everyone hear me okay? If I can get a nod from Linda, or I can't see the chat because I'm okay. Yes. So welcome everyone, and thank you, Linda, for that really beautiful welcome. I also just want to pay my respects and honor Elders Mary Lou and Dan for that beautiful opening. And I am so grateful and thankful to have the opportunity to work on this territory toward the eradication of gender-based violence, where we all know that Indigenous women pay the highest price. And to me, this is Canada's greatest shame. And so it's something, as someone who works so hard against gender-based violence, it's something I keep in the front of my heart at all times, and that we all do here at Aura Freedom. I just wanted to welcome everyone to this space and let you all know that your wellness is important to us here at Aura Freedom. This training can be heavy and distressing at times. Now, we are not going to go through the full training today. It's just kind of an agency overview of our program, but it could still be quite difficult. I just want to bring to the group here, this huge group, that let's remember how many people are on this call and are in the world that still care. There are more good than bad people in the world, and everyone showing up on this call cares about ending exploitation, empowering youth, empowering Indigenous communities. So let's remember that as we work through the material. Remember that we are all here because we want to see a better world, and that always gets me up in the morning, even when it's really, really hard. We also have a suggested citation for this presentation. Aura Freedom is a grassroots organization, so we're a very small team, and we truly believe that the excellence of the grassroots is just as important as academia, as high-level research, as government response. And so we believe that our work should be cited and honored in the same way, just as the Learning Network does for grassroots organizations. And so if you like what we're sharing and want to incorporate it in your work, please do. That's really beautiful for us, and that's how we create change. And we ask you that if you do, to just cite where you got the information from, because I think there's something to be said about honoring all the emotional labor and intellectual labor that all of grassroots, not just Aura Freedom, so many of you on the call put into our work. And so we're trying to change the culture here of struggling grassroots organizations. So yeah, who we are. Aura Freedom, in a nutshell, works to eradicate gender-based violence. So we work to prevent it. And we do that by achieving equity and striving to achieve true equity for all human beings, women and girls, first and foremost, because we are a women's organization and we're women-led and survivor-led. However, also equity across all social aspects of life. So we're talking about gender and racial equity and social class. And we believe that is the key to eradicating gender-based violence. Violence thrives in situations of inequity and in situations where there's a power imbalance. Gender-based violence and human trafficking is a very old story of who is valued more and who is valued less. And if we can build up our communities to be empowered and know their worth, we can cut exploitation at the root. This is our method. I'm going to go into the way we address trafficking specifically, but our method is using equity advancing education, using intersectional feminism. So Aura Freedom embarks on many different creative projects, campaigns, and trainings to prevent violence. We are an upstream approach organization, so we do look at high upstream approaches to prevent the violence, as opposed to responding to the violence when it has already happened. And again, we're survivor-centered, we're trauma-informed, and we're all about pumping up the grassroots, and many of our reports are all about showcasing grassroots excellence. Yeah, so some considerations today. Human trafficking, is often seen as a crime, and indeed it is, but more importantly, we view it as a human rights abuse. And we recognize that trafficking happens in many different industries. Our focus today is on sex trafficking because that is our focus as an organization, but we do recognize that it happens in many different forms of domestic labor and farming, in the fishing industry, in countless industries. And so this is really important to consider. And it's important to note that we meet survivors where they are, recognizing their own diverse background, stories, and choices. And so being survivor-centered means that we refute what a typical victim should look like in the patriarchal view of victims, because in working with so many different survivors of trafficking around the world, I have seen that they fit so many different molds, and we can't paint everyone with the same brush, and we would be silly to do so because we won't be achieving anything. And so just some of our considerations, I won't read them all. This is really what I want to focus on today, is the way we address human trafficking and the way our youth peer prevention project addresses it. Human trafficking thrives in conditions of inequity, as I've already stated. And so we view trafficking as a human rights abuse and focus on that issue. We believe that we will never, ever end human trafficking if we don't address inequities of gender, race, socioeconomic status, and more. If your anti-trafficking work is not doing this, then it simply won't be effective. And we've learned by working with different communities, we've learned by working with survivors, and we've learned by seeing what happens when programs don't incorporate an anti-oppressive focus on human trafficking. We often hear anyone can be trafficked, and I've seen so many of our colleagues who have joined this call, and I really want to thank everyone for being here. I saw a lot of familiar names popping up. And this is true. We say this, right? In our sector, we say anyone can be trafficked. However, there are communities that are more at risk of exploitation and who have been historically targeted. And so we must recognize this And if we don't, then we're actually doing more harm than good. So intersectionality really matters. And this is where I've learned the most from our youth team, from working in communities, and from, I mean, as Linda mentioned, we work in different countries. And so this always comes back to intersectionality and looking at the inequities if we want to eradicate violence. It's not just about crime. So I know there's some police on the call and government officials I saw who are perhaps working at the level of government or in police. It is a crime, but we know, and many of us, and I'm sure Collin knows, and he's going to explain that later, that when we're working with survivors, many of them will never report their trafficker to police for fear of retribution or due to a mistrust of the authorities. And so in order to combat trafficking in a holistic way, Aura Freedom focuses on human trafficking as a human rights abuse and not as a crime. If we focus on crime, we might also find ourselves focusing on the many crimes that survivors are forced to commit while they are being exploited. And I'm sure if the cameras were on, I would see a lot of heads nodding. We know that many times girls are often asked to carry guns, to carry drugs for their trafficker. A pimp or an exploiter will take out 3 or 4 credit cards, different credit cards in a young woman's name and max out and ruin her credit. And so if we focus on crime, then we're also focusing on these crimes as well, if we were to call them that. And so we believe in the non-punishment principle when working with survivors of human trafficking. So how the Peer Prevention Project started, it's one of my favorite projects here at Aura Freedom. Well, we were providing human trafficking awareness to youth, to frontline, service providers, to police, and to educators. And we asked ourselves, how can we make the program more powerful, and how can we really get through to the youth even more? And we knew the answer was to make the project youth-led, I should say. And so in 2018, with a project grant from the City of Toronto, we officially launched the project. Now, excuse me for just one moment while there we go. Okay, so our peer prevention project brings awareness to and prevents human trafficking through presentations for youth by youth. Okay, so these take place in schools, homeless shelters, group homes. They've been to libraries, mosques, churches, and other community spaces where they're invited. And this presentation also provides support and access to services for survivors of sexual exploitation. And we partner with the Toronto Rape Crisis Center for a lot of on-site trauma counseling. If any of them are on this call, thank you so much for your support throughout the years. And we'll get into that a little bit later of how that part of the project was formed. Initially, we hired 6 women identifying youth who had various lived experience, including human trafficking, to create the Peer Prevention Project. And a shout out to our original OG youth team. Many of them, we still work with many of them. Some of them are still on payroll or they do speaking engagements for us, and of course paid fantastic honoraria because that's what we believe in. And so shout out to everyone here in this picture, you know who you are. So before we, pardon the expression, threw the ladies to the wolves, we made sure that they had the appropriate training needed. And what does that look like? We didn't really know exactly what it looked like. We had an idea because of our expertise and our experience. But what we did is we held a community consultation before even hiring a single person. And we asked community members, survivors, Indigenous educators, shout out to Bridget and Mel Compton, Mel, you can see in the picture here, who always showed up to consult for us. City of Toronto staff, we had TDSB teachers, the 519, and other frontline health and social workers. We had a big consultation in person, as we used to do them back then. And we asked them what training they thought the youth should have. And we created a curriculum. And we provided 20 plus training sessions to each youth team member. They were paid for each hour of their training. They were provided with lunch and transit expenses as well. So this was really important for us to bring this into the project. And so 5 months was just training. The youth team loved the training as well. So after the training was complete, the youth team created some takeaways. So they created a postcard, a double-sided postcard with information and Canada's human trafficking helpline on it. And they also created a resource list that we would leave in hand for teachers or shelter workers or social workers, wherever they were going. And now that because of COVID, it's pivoted online, this is emailed out. So we have resources. Disclosures were happening. So we have about a 60% disclosure rate, folks. So that means, 60% of the time when the youth went out, they were getting a disclosure. And they were given training beforehand on how to compassionately and appropriately receive that disclosure, but they were never asked to provide support. That's where our partnership with the Toronto Rape Crisis Center, Multicultural Women Against Rape, came in, and we would never go anywhere without a trained trauma counselor on site. So one of the TRCC's trauma counselors would come out with the youth team for every single presentation. There's Cinnamon at Horizons for Youth with Asha and Marlena. And this was a crucial and still is a very important part of this project, is really, really making sure that counselors are available for the youth who disclose, so we can refer to appropriate services, and for our staff to debrief with and counsel after some difficult events. We collect data through a survey after every single workshop or presentation or whatever we call them. The name changes all the time. Sometimes they're long workshops and sometimes they're short presentations, whatever time limit we have. So here's a few survey results. In 2019 and / the beginning of 2020, the youth team did 48 presentations in schools and youth shelters and group homes, etc., and served over 2,000 youth and teachers and frontline workers. And I honestly think this number is a lot bigger because some of those were webinars that are still being watched. And these are the ages surveyed. And the prevalence of HT in Toronto started coming out. In one youth shelter we visited, I was actually there for this presentation because I'm not present at all of them, or actually most of them. 51% of the youth said that they knew someone who was being trafficked or who was trafficking others, or who actually came forward and said, I need some help because this is happening to me. So that was in one Toronto youth shelter. In those 48 presentations, so again here, 48 presentations, we had 24 survivors of sexual violence who came forward, and human trafficking. It wasn't always human trafficking, but it was sexual violence as well. And we were able, through the Toronto Rape Crisis Center and other partners at CJ Refugee Center, for some of the newcomer youth who came forward, we were able to provide support there. We ask questions like, do you feel safe in your neighborhood? When 30% of our youth don't feel safe in their neighborhoods, we have to look at how we can empower them to feel safer. If they don't feel safe online, if 40% are not really feeling safe online, we know that we have to do something here. And so this validates our approach of online internet safety, which is a part of the presentation. And so here's a little bit of feedback on systemic issues. So the youth are asked in that survey at the end if they feel the police exist to help them. And this isn't done as a way to shame the police. This is done because we want to know if half the youth don't feel that the police exist to help them, how will they ever reach out for help to the police? How will they ever view them as someone who can help them? And so that mistrust of authorities is, and we shared these results with the City of Toronto. So people know. Prevention programs work. Why do we focus on all of that gender equality and anti-oppression? And why do we focus on empowering marginalized youth with knowledge. And we just find, quite simply, is because it works. Our program works. The youth have told us, we have youth emailing us at the end of presentations. And so education and knowledge dissemination work. It takes a little bit longer. We know that there's no quick fix to human trafficking, but lifting young people up by accepting them for who they are. And when youth feel seen, it empowers them. And we know it's hard to traffic an empowered person. I always say it's hard to traffic an empowered youth. Why? Because the trafficker doesn't have time. He or she will move on to a person that they don't have to spend so much time on because they need to make money. They want to, get their job done. So when someone knows their value and knows their worth, it's really, really hard to exploit them. And so this is what we focus on. Our youth team impact was really beautiful as well. And it was a surprise to me because I wasn't sure how the youth team themselves would feel about the project, not just the youth they presented to, but they all said that they felt they had a role model, new friends, more self-confidence, and that they felt that they had a sense of accomplishment in the community. And that's the most important thing, I think. Challenges of the peer prevention project. Well, there was a lot, this is changing, but there was a lack of understanding and still is of the importance of knowing about human trafficking and the urgency to implement this at the school level. And again, this is changing. We could probably talk about the new mandate, but we don't have time. COVID-19. So how did we pivot? Well, we went online. You know what? I got to be honest. It's not the same. Presenting online is not the same. Youth are not disclosing as much because they don't have that face-to-face support. They can't reach out at the end and grab one of the facilitators' hand and say, can I talk to you over there or outside? And that connection is not happening. So that has been a challenge. We use breakout rooms with our trauma counselor. We use private chats as much as possible, but it's not always as effective. And precarious funding. So, we've had project-based funding for the peer prevention project since its inception. So it's 4 years old now, and we still don't have sustainable funding for this program that is really powerful in the community. So that's been a challenge as well. Some of the topics covered in our peer prevention project. I know we don't have, too much time to go through the presentation itself, but if you want to book a presentation or know more about the workshops, you can, Tashin will put in the chat now where you can go for more information on booking or knowing more about the peer prevention project. So we look at what is sex trafficking. So we start with definitions and stats and considerations. We watch a video. This video changes. We're really, really big on vetting videos. There's some really problematic ones out there, some really strong ones. The one that we use right now is actually the federal government of Canada's video. We were part of the nationwide consultation for when they were putting this new human trafficking website together. So we thought it was good for us to use the video as well. And it's actually pretty good. And Tasha will put that link in the chat. Current trends, case studies, and dispelling myths and rumors. So here's that video, but we won't play it because we don't have the time, but you can get it from the Government of Canada's Human Trafficking website. How does sex trafficking happen? So we talk about the luring and grooming. We talk about how the exploiter tries to find that crack in the surface of the young person, whatever that crack may be, whether they're from an Inuit community and have been brought to the city and don't have any support, whether they have experienced sexual abuse as a child, whether they're part of the foster care system, whether they're just a girl that doesn't like the way that she looks. And in this day and age, that's not good enough. So whatever that crack is, the trafficker is going to find that. So we talk about the luring and grooming, and then we talk about the control. So we talk about coercive control and trauma bonds, otherwise known as the Stockholm Syndrome, and how intimate partners are often used, and the Romeo trafficker and all those things. So those pieces are all discussed with the youth, sometimes in 1, 2, or 3 presentations if we can. If not, we do it all in one big extravaganza, and we're often rushed through it. But if we can go back to a shelter or a school 2 or 3 times, we do it as a series. But folks, this is where we spend the most time. Why does sex trafficking happen? After exploring different risk factors, and there are many, we really dive deep into 4 different communities that are specifically targeted, 4 or 5, I should say. And this is our passion. And this is the Peer Prevention Project's unique offering to the counter trafficking community in Canada and beyond. So we really dive deep into girls, Indigenous youth, Black youth, and LGBTQ2S+ youth. Now, when we talk about girls, we make it intersectional. So Black, Indigenous, and girls of color, migrant girls, girls in foster care. And we do say, yes, boys can be trafficked as well. Our focus as a women's organization is on girls. They are 97% of the trafficking victims here in Canada. But yes, boys can be trafficked too. But we look at these communities, and our youth really dive deep into the root causes. Collin will get into, of course, the Indigenous piece, and which is the most important piece of this puzzle, in my opinion. So we look at the gender factor. This is where I have a lot of fun. So we look at gender roles and how those gender roles really come into play. And we look at the objectification of women and girls and the hypersexualization. We look at unhealthy masculinity. And we don't shame the boys in the room, but we call them in. And we ask them to talk about the ways that they feel they are being pressured to validate their masculinity in unhealthy ways. And we unpack that with the kids. They don't like when I call them kids, but they are, because they're really young, most of the ones we speak to. So, and then LGBTQ 2S+ folks. And so we talk about how rates of youth who are living on the street or who don't have homes and don't have the support necessary to reach out, they are exploited as well. And so we, with different research and with some different stats, we unpack how these communities are also affected by trafficking and exploitation. Collin will obviously get into this very important piece. I think if you're not discussing Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit folks when you're talking about trafficking, then you're doing a big disservice to the trafficking community. I've worked with different Indigenous survivors, and I think that the legacy of residential schools and colonialism has created communities who are specifically targeted. They are specifically targeted. And we know the amount of youth that are in foster care who are Indigenous. And so the genocide of Indigenous peoples has directly contributed to their overrepresentation in the sex trade and their overrepresentation in human trafficking situations. Collin will leave it to the experts. Black communities, so Asha, who was the leader of our youth team, created this with some Black youth. So we asked them what we should speak about when we're talking about how Black bodies are often fetishized. And in trafficking situations, I've worked with young girls who have told me that they were preyed upon because they were Black, specifically because they have a Black body, and forced to do specific things that white girls weren't ever asked to do because it was especially degrading. We have to address those types of things. And so we kind of talk about how Black communities and other communities of color too are more vulnerable to exploitation and trafficking. And we have a case study of Centoya Brown that we get into with the youth, and it's really fun. It actually becomes a fun exercise. So again, what does all this have to do with trafficking, all these, targeted communities? Well, the root causes, again, this is what we do. We really drill it in. I know this is repetitive, but I really hope it's getting through that. If we build the equity, we will cut the exploitation at the root. We also, after we talk about the risk factors, we talk about protective factors. We get into consent. We talk about healthy relationships and consent within relationships, because most trafficking, still domestic trafficking in Toronto, happens through a boyfriend figure. And so we talk about healthy relationships. It can also happen with a best friend figure or a close friend. Internet safety. With COVID-19, this has become even more important, and we're looking at expanding this part of the program. Empathy and shifting perspectives. This is also very important. And so for the frontline workers on the call, we also do a frontline training. We offer half day and full day trainings at different costs. Because again, we are, this does have precarious funding. So we are trying to self-sustain the program. So anytime we run a workshop right now, because the program is unfunded, we do ask for a fee so that we can pay our staff. But the last one we did was Women's Habitat Shelter in Etobicoke. And we trained all of the shelter staff. We've done so many, and these are one of my favorite things to do. So to really empower our frontline workers who see and do so much work with a little more information on human trafficking, which they might not know. So in having said that, I was trying to get through it all on time. I'm so glad I did. To all of the frontline workers on the call, the educators, the service providers, Mary Lou and Dan again, and Collin, and then also the Learning Network. If you haven't been told lately, please know that your work saves lives. Sometimes, you know, it's easy to get up and feel robotic, and we have compassion fatigue, but I just want everyone on this call to know how valuable you are to us, and we stand in solidarity with you all. So for more information, here are some links. Please check out our work. We do more than the Peer Prevention Project, and check out our Relentless Resilience campaign. And Tashin is going to put some links, and I'm open to all questions after Collin presents. So thank you so much again, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you, Marissa, and we're going to turn it right over to Collin.
So all she needs to do is see my report.
Hey everyone. Thank you, Marissa. That was amazing. I feel like I got to know a lot more about you and your agency, so thank you. I'm really looking forward to working closer with you in the near future, so yay. All right. Oh, right, I have control of the slides. Anyone who knows me knows I'm the worst at technology, so thanks for hanging in there with me. Okay. All right, so I don't know why it goes twice, but whatever, we'll get through it. So there's a potential trigger warning. I don't think I have anything in this presentation that would create emotional response. However, it's important to know that should you have an emotional response, one, note that it's normal. It's completely natural. It's a human experience. I do know that we have some amazing resource people here with us today, both Mary Lou Smoke and Dan Smoke. As well as I would encourage you to reach out to supports and resource people in your area.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, I'm trying to get this done.
I don't know why it does it twice.
All right.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Sorry to interrupt, Collin, but
Yep.
there's some background noise.
Yeah, I apologize. I've got another office mate in the cubicle over.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I just want to tell a story. I'm a big avid storyteller. And so before I actually get to the story, I need to make my acknowledgements. I think the very first acknowledgement I need to make is definitely a land acknowledgement. I think it's really, really important, especially on this virtual platform, that we take the opportunity to acknowledge the lands that we currently work and live in. I myself come from Treaty 3 territory. However, I live in Thunder Bay. I work in Thunder Bay, as well as I'd like to take this opportunity to thank and acknowledge the Treaty Territory of Robinson Superior for allowing me to speak and share and learn here in this land. I'd also like to address the fact that although I appreciate and acknowledge land acknowledgements, it's extremely important that when we make land acknowledgements, that we also follow up with commitment, because I believe that once we have the knowledge and the power of that knowledge of knowing where we reside, we have a responsibility to follow up, especially in this time of reconciliation. The next acknowledgement I most definitely need to make is I'd like to acknowledge both Mary Lou and Dan Smoke, not only for their openings, but the song, the sacred items that were used in the opening and moving us forward in a good way. And I need to also make another acknowledgement to survivors. I believe that survivors are the real experts when it comes to this work. If it wasn't for survivor voices and the courage that survivors use to come forward to share their stories, we would not be making the great gains and moving forward with the momentum that we're moving now in Ontario. So with this slide here, you'll see that my slides are always very cryptic. That's how I roll. It's my final acknowledgement, I guess. And the acknowledgement I really need to make here is to my elder, the elder that has been with me since I started doing this work when I transitioned from the ASO sector to the to this new work around human trafficking. The elder I work with is Miss Mona Hardy. Mona Hardy is an elder with lived experience, and it's interesting. So when I first started doing this work, like I talked about, I came from the ASO sector, which was the aid service organizations. So I was familiar with doing outreach at a street-based level, all harm reduction or non-interference teachings. And I knew one of the very first people I needed to reach out to do this work in human trafficking was Mona Hardy, in the sense that she had already had an established working relationship with the girls on the street at the street-based level. And so I reached out to her within the first few days of getting hired here at Onwa. And I remember asking her, I said to her, Mona, now how do I fight the oldest living profession? And this is why I love Mona. Mona was the one. I love being corrected. If I make a mistake, I love making mistakes. I try to make a mistake every day, and most oftentimes I make 10. And so Mona was, she corrected me, and she corrected me by telling me that it was not the oldest living profession. She told me that it was actually the third oldest living profession. The second oldest living profession is agriculture, and the first oldest, or the real oldest living profession is actually motherhood. The moment she aligned me with motherhood, I knew that when we were going to do this work, it had to be done in a nurturing way, moving forward and ensuring that we made it feel like mom's kitchen, if you will. I know that's where I've always felt safest. All right. Oh, it's going to double. Oh, great, it didn't. All right. So for the most part, I think it's really important that we need to acknowledge that language is very powerful. I think language can be weaponized. It has been weaponized. And so I'm very cognizant of the type of language that I do use. So for the most part, through this presentation, I will use survivor or person with lived experience. Should I use the term victim, it's relating back to someone's experience or story and how they told it to me. But for the most part, during our time, in my time working with survivors, they identified as survivors, which is amazing. The fact that they thought, when I was working with survivors, they always made mention that they never saw themselves as a victim because they were still here and they were here to share that story. So that was my foundational experience with the women, and I'm so appreciative of that. I think it's also important to remember that with growth and safer spaces, we bring survivors by building up their capacity so that they eventually leave survivors and transition into a person with lived experience, recognizing that this continuum is a journey. Real quick cliff notes when it comes to colonialism and violence. I think it's really important to remember that Canada has a history. And that history belongs to all of us, right? We as Indigenous people who've walked here since time immemorial and had those deep connections to the land, to the water. And again, I'd like to really acknowledge Mary Lou and Dan for that. So with, you know, I think it's important to remember too, with colonialism, it's not something that just happened and just occurred in 1492, right? I think we really need to acknowledge that colonialism is a much bigger machine than that, and that colonialism predates 1492. It actually started in the feudal system in Europe. It's with colonialism, you know, the only way to colonize the land here was by first colonizing themselves first as newcomers. When they did come here, it's important to also acknowledge that colonialism is a shared experience, making it a relational issue. And that if we're ever going to move further along this journey of reconciliation and healing together to make a brighter future, I guess, in Canada, we really need to acknowledge that it is a relational issue and that we all have shared responsibility when it comes to moving forward. With colonialism, it's really, really important to remember it brought a different type of violence to our lands, violence that we were not completely, that were pretty much completely new to us. And I think it's really important for me at this part to talk about how intimate partner or domestic violence is really a gateway violence that leads to much larger levels of violence that include physical, mental, sexual abuse. And that again will lead into, and can and has led into the MMIWG, what we're seeing with the MMIWG in Canada. Colonialism has definitely created systemic barriers that lead to poverty, gender, race, and class inequities. There's four major types of contemporary human trafficking. Looks like, again, we're speaking from experiences of our survivors, and the survivors that we are engaging with are all talking about sex trafficking. The four main types we've seen are familial-based trafficking, which is oftentimes driven by poverty, intergenerational violence, compound trauma. Familial-based trafficking also includes exchange, not just for money, but other things such as food, shelter, clothing. We are also really seeing more often now the organized or gang facilitated trafficking, which also involves street level sex, underground brothels, escort services, and of course, exotic dancing. We definitely see substance dependency or substance use trafficking, where the survivors are engaging in sex trade in order to feed their chemical addictions or dependencies that can relate to human trafficking relationships. And one I'm not sure if people are talking enough about is economically driven associated trafficking, which is directly aligned with oil, mining business developments, or international events. Quick story to that. I remember when we were wrapping up and doing our report for the Journey to Safe Spaces back in 2017. And it was the time that there was the International Mining Conference that was happening in Toronto, just across the street from the Chelsea. I think it's still called the Chelsea. No, it's not. Delta Chelsea. Who knows? I'm really old. I don't know the name of the hotel anymore. And the experience we saw was right across the street was this gentleman's club, I think it was called Zanzibar. And right across from it was, or on top of it, was the marquee that was welcoming all the international miners, inviting them to come in. And remember when we were in the lobby of the hotel, we could see people buying sex right in the lobby on the sofas. To really drive this one home, I think it's really important from an Indigenous worldview lens to really acknowledge that I believe that human trafficking or exploitation of Indigenous women will always exist so long as we're extracting resources from the land, especially because of our deep connection and relationship to land, because what we are teaching the current generation and future generations that it's okay to exploit the land. And if it is okay to exploit the land, we are actually giving consent to do the same to Indigenous women. Situation right now, we recognize definitely that Indigenous women, girls, and as well as men shape up a very disproportionate number of those that are exploited here in Canada today. We know that it leads to physical, emotional, and psychological violence. There's always that financial vulnerability piece that consistently puts survivors or people that are entrenched in a constant state of fear. That state of fear over time compounded, it becomes intergenerational trauma. We know that violence against Indigenous women and girls contributes to the normalization of violence and teaches women to accept this and normalize it as a part of their lives. What Marissa was getting to, I think it's really important to acknowledge that human trafficking, yes, we know exists here in Canada, exists in all of our communities, regardless if you're rural, remote, on reserve. But it's really important to remember that although the experience with Indigenous people, like people can just be, there's a reason why we have an Indigenous-led fund in Ontario, and that's because there are parallels when it comes to trafficking with mainstream Canada. There's a very unique difference, and that very unique difference has to deal directly with our relational issue with colonialism. So when we're talking about exploitation, you need three things. Act means purpose, right? Within the act, we know that it's the recruitment, the transportation, the transferring, harboring, or the receipt of people. Then you need the means, which is the use of threats, force of, or use of force, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, vulnerability, and given payments or benefits. And finally, you need the purpose, which is the exploitation, including prostitution of other people, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, or similar practices, removal of organs, and other types of exploitation. Now, I want to be very clear with you. There are no reported cases of removal of organs anywhere in Canada. Typically, that is related to developing countries. And when I talk about other types of exploitation, thanks to the hard work of the liaisons and partnerships with our new partners, as well as new survivor voices that are coming up even here in the North. We are seeing exploitation of Indigenous artists where they're brought and isolated, oftentimes used with substance misuse, and have the artists produce art and the traffickers sell their art at high cost, giving, of course, the artist nothing. All right, this slide. Okay, so remember how I talked about there's parallels with trafficking with mainstream society? Well, I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that our relationship with colonialism that goes back now over 500 years, there's definitely 4 steps to recruitment. It's the initial meeting, gifts with the visible strings, the breaking of spirit identity, and finally it goes into exploitation. Now, this is very true on an individual basis. However, when we're looking at the Indigenous population or Indigenous peoples or First Peoples that have been here, including Inuit, First Nations, and as well as Métis, because of the history and the impacts of intergenerational trauma and colonialism, when traffickers are actually meeting us as individuals, as Indigenous individuals, they're already meeting us at a breaking of identity of spirit. So it's actually a lot easier, which makes it, I guess, what can make us more vulnerable to being exploited, because a lot of us also haven't had those opportunities or spaces to really unpack our own colonial ideology or unpack our own traumas. Wrong button. So one of the questions I would often always get asked when it comes to doing this work is, why don't they just get out of it? Why don't they just call for help? It's really important to know that when it comes to talking about exploitation, it's not just an underworld, it's its own culture. And what we know about cultures is they have their own language, their own beliefs, their politics, their economics. It's really, It's also hard for someone to also recognize that they might actually be trafficked. In fact, if you were actually to go up to somebody who's still entrenched and tell them that they are trafficked, or if they need help to get away from the traffickers, they oftentimes would tell you to buzz off, is the nice way I can say it right now. So it's, when it comes to this trafficking, the best way I could kind of describe it within Cliff Notes is based off of kind of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I'm not really ripping it off from Maslow, because Maslow ripped it off of the Blackfoot people. So what I will talk about is how the culture works. It starts with luring, right? That's the whole recruitment process, which begins oftentimes with friendship or romancing. And what I mean by romancing, Marissa talked about it earlier, about Romeo pimping is typically what we see. This is where the recruiter or the trafficker creates a sense of belonging and begins assessing boundaries, not just the boundaries of the individual, they're assessing the boundaries of the home. They're assessing, so they're like, if I keep you 10 minutes past curfew, who's going to look for you, right? Those kinds of things. So they're not just testing the boundaries of the individual, they're also testing the boundaries of the support network. It's also important to, after luring, it goes into grooming, which is also oftentimes labeled as the honeymoon phase. This is where there's either an abundance of gifts. Now, I'll be very clear with you, when it comes to the abundance of gifts, usually working with Indigenous survivors, it's not like the Louis Vuittons, it's not like the name brand purses or high-end clothing and nails. Oftentimes, like I talked about, that breaking of spirit, and because of the object poverty, because of colonialism, people are already our survivors are being met already in precarious positions. So this could often, the currency can often look like food, or they'll pay this month's rent for your family. Coercion. There's often, this is where like there's crazy mixed messages sent, like that emotional roller coaster ride, that lot of gaslighting, highs and lows, needing to, and then the person that's being recruited, they feel like they need to do whatever they have to do, get back in the good books to get back to that honeymoon phase. Once the trafficker realizes this, that they're at that point that they'll do anything to get back there, like a light switch, all of a sudden we get into exploitation. This is when all the boundaries get broken down, oftentimes with isolation. There's a learned dependency. Marissa was talking about the trauma bonds. Often a lot of financial pressure for owing for what that trafficker or the friend has offered them and or their family. And oftentimes threat to safety, and not just threats of their own safety, threats to their family, specifically younger siblings. Oh, wrong button again. I keep hitting my keyboard. I'm the worst for it. Oh, right. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that Ontario does have a strategy to end human trafficking. It came about in 2016 is when it was launched, and its aims were to increase the awareness, the coordination, as well as to improve survivors' access to sector initiatives. It's really important to recognize that Ontario did their strategy a lot differently than other provinces, in the sense that it's a 4-pillar approach. And the 4 pillars would be the prevention and community supports, provincial coordination and leadership, the justice sector initiatives, and finally the Indigenous-led approaches, which is the first of its kind across Canada, which is partly why I'm here. Beautiful. Here at Onwa, we have we definitely recognize that there's that need for transitional supports. At first, we thought it was going to be a safe home, but survivors advised us against doing a safe home. So we recognize there still needs to be transitional supports for housing for trafficked survivors that'll help them begin that a new life, but begin their healing process. What I love about working here at the Ontario Native Women's Association is as we began really diving into this work, we recognized that all staff that work here, regardless of what portfolio or program they worked in, needed to be trained when it comes to human trafficking not only just efforts, but just what the signs to look for, right? To build their capacity to do that work, because every employee that works here, and that includes our receptionists, is potentially a doorway of opportunity to success. And so in order for that to happen, we needed everybody, all of our staff trained, and we do regular training as new people as we continue to grow and expand, because we acknowledge that not only is everybody an opportunity to success, but we view our entire agency as a blanket for wraparound supports. So we have a plethora of programming, ensuring that we can always meet survivors wherever they are at any given time. There is no such thing as a one standardized safety plan for survivors. Everything is led by the survivor, and they will tell us what they need. We are not the experts. We are nothing but facilitators of change to ensure that people have the tools necessary that are going to bring them further along in their healing journeys and their self-discoveries. Another thing I'd like to acknowledge too, all the work and programming that we do is often advised and inputted by survivors. So we include survivor voice guiding our work, recognizing that our work is they're living programs. They're constantly evolving to meet the emerging trends because, let's face it, gang members and traffickers and pimps don't have to go to a board of directors for approval. So we have to keep our program open-ended and flexible to meet the ever-changing needs with this culture. Totally went ahead of myself. So on the other thing that we do, so my program, specifically the liaison program, or the Indigenous Anti-Human Trafficking Liaison Program, was intended to support Indigenous communities by providing survivor-focused localized responses to human trafficking. The overall objectives and the initiatives are building agency, community, and survivor capacity. We work with existing frontline services, along with partner agencies, chapters, councils, to address the complex needs of survivors. We support Indigenous-specific prevention and awareness campaigns. An example of that would be this Blue Jingle Earring Project campaign that we did at July 31st. The blue is the same color as the blue for the UN Blue Heart, acknowledging trafficking. Please feel free to join us. We do 2 campaigns, one on February 22nd and one in July 30th. Sorry, I got the date wrong. What I'm most proud of, I'm very proud of the team that helped put this together, is our report during the Safe Spaces. You'll see the blue hyperlink at the bottom. I'm sure Sarah's really quick to also put that in the chat. Journey to Safe Spaces is a very unique document. It's actually a foundational document that laid the groundwork based off of survivors. Why I'm so proud of this document is that there were over 250 survivor voices, or 250 survivors engaged. This report had nothing to do about elevating and turning it wasn't about publishing their actual trauma stories. This was about meeting survivors where they were at to find out what they need, right? We know that survivors are already tired of always having to retell their story. Any Indigenous community, for that matter, will tell you the same thing. We are engaged to death. This is why this report was so pivotal in our work. It was based off of Indigenous-led survivor voice, and there were great outcomes that came from it. Some of those wrong button again. Some of those outcomes, from the survivor engagement, were the recommendations. Survivor recommendations that we ended up actually turning into a 5-year strategic plan, and I'm really, really excited to talk about even so from the 14 recommendations in there. in the Journalistic Space report became a part of our work plan. We are now implementing new phases. So we definitely still do the capacity building for frontline services, but now we're moving into a new phase where we're doing long-term curative practice for survivors, whether that be land-based activities, land-based camps, we're doing beading activities, collaborative spaces where we can come together to help root a strong sense of identity and survivor. While doing this work, we recognized what was happening was within the engagements that a lot of survivors had on top of the internalized intergenerational compounded traumas, there was also an underlying level of grief. And a lot of that grief was directly related to the MMIWG. And so I ended up going into Vision and to Sweat, where I had Vision, and we created the Grandmother Earth dress. And of this dress, there's 365 jingles on it that represent that Indigenous women are confronted with violence every single day of the year without any reprieve. It was also used at the commission for when they were looking for their witnesses here in Thunder Bay, and then traveled all across Canada. But more importantly, this dress was an opportunity for survivors to come and start doing their grief work. It was the red dress is actually one of our sacred items within the bundle here at Onwa, and has been not only used for families of MMIW, but also the street family or chosen family of those who have had the experience around exploitation. Another experience that through some of our trauma-informed healing work are the Mandela Rock projects. And what we did here is, for an example, each dot is to honor and recognize all the amazing good qualities, good memories that people had of their loved one. And so after the project, they did the project, they were able to take those rocks that they painted, remembering and honoring their loved one in a positive way. We were able to either keep it, place it out somewhere sacred, and some of them also gifted it back to our agency to keep with the Grandmother Earth Dress bundle to use as an opportunity of growth and healing and teaching moments. You know, big thing that we heard from survivors, the biggest thing I'm going to definitely hit with this one is my story is not your story to tell, which is why when we did this work that we recognized we weren't going to be posting or putting anyone's actual story in there, because the survivor was right. It isn't our story to tell. And so we don't claim ownership over those stories. We wanted to be very clear that with this report, the best way to protect that was that we're not publishing those. But we're going to be publishing are what they identified as key issues that needed to be addressed for there to be change. You know, the wonderful thing when doing this work, we did follow-up engagements with community supports and other service agencies after we did the survivor engagements. And it wasn't to scold, it wasn't to highlight and give applause to whoever did great. It was actually, it was the opportunity where we were able to now start creating our coalitions to move forward, recognizing that regardless if people had HT funding or not, could also be a part of the conversation and creating safer spaces in our cities where the coalitions were happening at the time. And in their engagements, they also mirrored exactly what the survivors had said without us even having to tell them what survivors were saying, which was amazing. Again, these are some of the recommendations that came forward directly from the survivors. There was 14 in total. These were just some of the ones that I'm highlighting. All this is available on the hyperlink that was in, I think is in the chat, as well as there's other resources, videos, presentations that you're all welcome to download and take a look at. Something I definitely have to acknowledge also, like I talked about this being a foundational document, within the document, there's also our safe spaces framework. And it's all based off of, the acronym, I'll just read it off quickly because I can't go through it all yet, is making sure that everything is survivor centered, that prevention through education, access to safe and respectful spaces, core supports, especially when it comes to transitioning into a new life, including emergency funding for immediate relocations. Everything also needs to be evidence-based, and of course, streamlined supports offered through, barrier simplified processes, recognizing that our own policies within our agencies can actually be a huge barrier to women actually accessing our services for help. This slide here, again, I just really want to acknowledge that I think my favorite one to read on here is, the girls need experiential support. They need us veterans, they need us survivors. And that one really always stuck with me. I've taken that one to heart. I walk with that one to heart every day because it really put into focus by building the capacity of survivors to become people with lived experience. We walk with them on their healing journey because we definitely believe that when we build the internal and external bundles of survivors, the survivors or the people with lived experiences actually become the new contemporary knowledge carriers when it comes to moving forward with community safety initiatives. So, with that, I think it's important that we take the time to acknowledge and honor survivors. It's giving it space so that the survivors themselves can recognize the internal fire that burns within them and showing them that they truly are and have leadership qualities and are essentially our new warrior women when it comes to community safety initiatives. With that, I would just like to say miigwech, and I guess we're opening up to questions and answers.
Thank you, Collin. And I'd just like to say that there were so many questions posed in the Q&A box. And Diane and I aren't going to have time to do them all. Some of them we can help make sure that there are resources that were requested, like links to resources. We can do that on the webpage that will feature this recording and other resources related to these programs, as well as human trafficking of youth in general. So what we've decided to do, and we're so pleased, we had over 1,300 for the first hour. The second hour, some people had to move on and we were down to 1,200 for most of that hour. And now we still have 1,100 still with us. And I would just like to say, we've made the decision, even though our time is coming to an end, to go ahead and we have chosen a question for Collin and a question for Marissa. And then we have a question that we'd like both of you to also answer. And then we're going to turn it back over to Mary Lou and Dan, the elders that have joined this presentation to bring us to a close. So I'm going to start, if that's okay, Diane, and ask this question of Marissa, given she's had a little break, although not too much of a break. I saw her answering questions in the Q&A. But one of the inquiries, Marissa, really focused on, recognized, first of all, the amazing young women that served as the peer mentors, peer trainers. And the question really relates to, one, how did you select these young women? And two, in addition to debriefing after a presentation with the trauma counselor, how did you provide support? Because this has to have been at times very rewarding, but at times quite an emotional burden. We would
Yeah. No, I thank you for the question because it's something I would have loved to have dug deeper into, but the time didn't allow. So we had, when we originally got the funding from the City of Toronto, we knew we wanted between 5 to 6 facilitators, and we put a simple social media square up. And then through our network, so we're part of the Toronto Counter Human Trafficking Network. We work a lot with smaller grassroots organizations. We just sent an email out saying, this is, you know, what we're looking for. And we had 42 applicants. We actually had 42 youth. So it was really important that the youth came forward saying, I want to do something like this. I'm ready to do something like this. We didn't scout anyone. It had to be, the initiative had to be theirs. I'm thinking of an Italian word, the voglia, the want had to be theirs to really be part of this team. So we had first interviews and then second interviews, and then we had third interviews. We had Zoom calls, but mostly in person. We had a couple phone calls. They were chosen based on their passion to make a difference in the community, based on what they told us in their interviews. That every single young woman that was hired had something special to offer. Not everyone was a survivor of trafficking. There were survivors, several, but others had different lived experience of coming from different communities. And so we just chose the youth that really to us looked like they were ready to make the biggest change. And then, as I mentioned in the chat, Collin, when he was speaking, I was like, yes, we've never, ever asked any survivor to share their experience or their story during a presentation. I refuse to ask them. They were there as professionals, as facilitators. And sometimes when they got really comfortable and felt really safe, they themselves would add, you know, when trafficking happened to me, and the youth were like, oh, it wasn't like, this is our survivor, this is our, you know, token survivor. Never. They were there as leaders, youth leaders. And so we provided the support through the Toronto Rape Crisis Center. We had debriefings every day. We were inseparable for almost a year. We were together every day. I mean, we used to meet even outside of work. We always shared meals. I feel like sharing meals is a really important way, especially with youth, to kind of, you know, share that meal with them and hear what they were doing throughout their day. They were given, so during the 5 months of training, they also kind of did a job shadowing. They would follow me to different presentations or frontline trainings, or even just like be in the office while I was answering emails. They met our board of directors. We have a really cool down-to-earth board of directors who, you know, provided training. And I want to give a shout out to Find Help 211, who actually provided us with, because as a grassroots organization, we don't have a huge office. We use a co-working shared space. They gave us like a safe space just to ourselves because they have a larger office and they had a free room. And so we would meet them and we would have lunches. Yeah, so whatever they needed. It wasn't very structured, I'm not going to lie. We didn't say, okay, it's check-in time, but it was just constantly meeting and making sure that the Toronto Rape Crisis Center counselors were really there for the youth as well. And they were, yeah.
Oh, thank you for that fulsome answer. And I
Yeah,
just
and
I saw Collin shaking his head when you said the importance of food, which
yeah.
presentation
And sometimes they would reach out, you know, at 11 or midnight. And, you know, you have to kind of be ready to answer those types of texts and calls when you're working with youth. You know, like we never just kind of turned our phone off and said, well, no, you know, so we were really, really, really available for that as well.
Thank you, Marissa.
Wonderful. And I have a question for Collin. Everyone really appreciated you talking through grooming and the culture of human trafficking. And there was a question about how is digital or online technology influencing the nature of human trafficking and sexual exploitation of Indigenous women and youth?
Oh, okay, that's a big one. So it was already big. It was already big before the pandemic. I think with social media, the internet, even gaming, even, you know, just even gaming consoles, anywhere where there's, I like to look at anything any phone, any device as a portal. You're having gateways and portals in your home. Especially with the pandemic, I think, some people were saying, human trafficking is going further underground, and it did essentially, but it was going further underground, but right under people's noses. So, for example, my sister has the strictest rule at her house, and I love her rule. So, her big rule is no devices get to leave the common areas of the house. So there's no computers, no TVs, no cell phones in people's bedrooms ever at any given time. And that's just her number one rule. And the internet gets shut off at about 9 o'clock at night. And like, that's a bit extreme, but that's also part of my sister's self-care, but it's also her safety plan and ensuring that her young kids aren't ever subjugated or opening up doors that she's not aware of. So with social media, absolutely. In fact, we're actually in the process of writing a whole new safety online planning for youth specifically, especially with not even just related to like social media platforms like Facebook. I'm talking like the fun ones like Instagram, Snapchat. There's a huge, those are huge recruiting grounds for traffickers and pimps, and they exclusively disguise themselves as their peer group and persuade through manipulation, all sorts of things, and they oftentimes use the youth's words that they say or pictures that they get through coercion to do even other degrading things.
Thank you so much for that. We'll look forward to that report when it comes out as well.
Beautiful.
So the final question, and we want each of you to answer, and we'll start with Marissa, is really in terms of, there were many service providers, and I really, really appreciated, Collin, when you said that, you started to build coalition. You don't have to have as your main focus human trafficking in order to provide support and service. And with that in mind, the question we wanted to ask both of you is, if a service provider were providing supports to those who may be experiencing human trafficking or have experienced or at risk of experiencing, come into contact with an organization, and the workers in that organization feel that this youth is being exploited, this youth is being trafficked, but the youth isn't ready or able or just doesn't see their situation in those terms. Do you have any words of wisdom in terms of providing support?
Yeah, go ahead, Collin. Go ahead, and then I'll come in after you.
Are you sure?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, sounds good. I think our experience with that is, especially working with young people, youth especially, oftentimes don't ever see themselves as entrenched or trafficked or even as a victim. And I think once you're there, I think it's vital that you maintain a relationship with that youth. And we've always engaged with have leading questions that get them to come to the conclusion themselves that they're not in the healthiest of relationships. And so we kind of do it kind of sneaky, right? Going to our old trainings around healthy boundaries, healthy relationships. What do they look like? We keep posing questions until the youth can come to it on their own terms. And like I said before, we like to look at our agency here at ONWA as a giant blanket. So we're able to meet people wherever they're at any given time. Every doorway is a doorway in to gain those services. There comes a time also though, where we also recognize in ourselves, but we also recommend for other that are still entrenched, that we all have a responsibility and a duty to to refer. And that's why also these coalitions were created, so that we can create a safety network within our own communities. It's also I need to implicitly drive home too, that I'm not going to be able to go to any community and fix it. The answers are already in your communities. This is a community issue, and community needs to stand up together, not just one sector. Right from grassroots, service providers, a cross-sectorial approach with justice, law, health. All of us need to come together, including the business sector, in ensuring that our young people are no longer in situations where they can be exploited.
Yeah, I completely agree. Not viewing yourself as a victim doesn't mean that you don't inherently know that what is happening to you is not right, that it feels bad, and that in some way you feel powerless. So there are challenges and barriers in identifying survivors of trafficking or for them to reach out. So believing that their exploitation is their choice or their fault is huge. So if we can shift the language from why don't they just leave, to understanding those barriers that are preventing the youth from getting out, then that's when the doors will open up, because they will see you. And this is something you do, even in some of domestic violence work, right? So we're shifting the language to understand the barriers. Youth may lie or misrepresent the truth when they're encountered by authority figures, right? Even if they really do want to tell you something, they will have rehearsed answers because their trafficker has told them, has programmed them to say these certain things or else. So they also believe that they might get arrested if they talk, or that no one cares about them. And there's a great sense of shame and hopelessness that comes with sexual violence. And so if we can identify the barriers, let them lead the conversation, mimic their language. So if they say, my boyfriend, refrain from saying, well, you mean your pimp or you mean your trafficker, mirror their language, and give them the opportunity to lead, because they're not able to lead any aspect of their life at the moment, and build the trust. They might not have that trust the first time you speak, or perhaps the second, but maybe on the third or fourth or fifth time. If you listen without judgment and with that empathy, that's everything. And everyone can do that. Every human being can do that. And yes, this is a community issue. There are experts on human trafficking, but it's not just the experts that are going to end human trafficking. It's all of us that are going to end the exploitation, right? And be aware of your questions. So don't ask for graphic details. Avoid making promises you can't keep, like no confidentiality if they are a child. Avoid, just be straight up with them. Soften your body language and soften your tone of voice. Those are all things that you can do. And again, we provide frontline training. There are other organizations that provide frontline training too, of course. So reach out maybe for your staff to get some frontline training would really be helpful.
I think Diane and I, having looked at all of the questions, can attest that there's great interest across the country in training from both of your programs and your teams. So I'm sure you will be hearing from people in a go forward position. At this point, we'd like to call on Elders Mary Lou Smoke and Dan to bring our resource spotlight to a conclusion.
You got Linda. Thank you so much, Marissa and Collin. I really learned a lot from listening to both of you. I don't know all that much about the subject. I know it's happening, but before today, I didn't know too much, but I feel a little more educated today. We have to always remember that it takes the whole community to help people, I remember ever since I was a little girl, my mom would say, you always have to remember to help your people, and so I've been doing that my whole life. And so we have to help the people who have been affected by this. We have to be able to have elders and knowledge keepers who can share with them, some one-on-ones, but having opportunities where there's gatherings where elders can just share about traditional knowledge and about loving one another and talking about the 7 grandfather teachings, and just planting a little bit of seeds here and there, on different types of healing. How getting involved in ceremony is so helpful to us, because that's always been our way. For thousands of years, we've always used the medicines. We've always gone on fasting, like 4-day fasting. What do you call it? Retreats, I guess you call it, for lack of a better word. The sweat lodge was our church. And so we have to have those things available, and we have to have people available to help our people. And even the non-native people, they need help as well. Like I often help non-native people. I never turn anybody away, because we're all human beings, and we have to be able to learn how to live in peace and harmony on this earth if we're going to survive. And the most important thing is that we have to learn to protect that water.
Oh, Marissa. Yeah, I don't really have too much to add to that, because like the comments have reflected how it's a community responsibility. I know that in the old days, yeah, that like you said, it takes a village to raise a child, comes straight from the great law of peace, and how with a situation like this, yeah, it takes a community to help stand up and help resolve this kind of situation, so that it doesn't get visited upon the community again. And that means you have to put up all kinds of safeguards and ways of prevention, means of prevention. So yeah, I learned a lot too, Marilu. I want to say Chimigwech Yahweh to both Collin and Marissa, for your comments. As Linda said, you are both great, accomplished speakers, and it was truly a pleasure to hear both of you. I'd just like to close with that.
Okay.
Chimigwech.
We're going to close the whole session off with this Native American prayer. It's by a Lakota elder, and I feel privileged to be able to share it with you, because I'm part Lakota. I'm mostly Ojibwe, having grown up in the Lake Superior, but my father's people came from the Dakotas, and they lived in the Sault Ste. Marie area. And at the turn of the 18th century, they were known as the half-breeds, because they were half Ojibwe and half Lakota. So I carry that blood in me, as well as some Mi'kmaq blood from my mom's side. So this prayer is something that we love to share with people, and it's available you can find it on the internet. And if you can't find it, you can contact us, and we both know it off by heart, so we could type it up for you. So, if you want to use this in your everyday life, you're welcome to do that. Okay. So this is from Chief Yellowhawk. O great spirit, whose voice I hear in the winds, and whose breath gives life to all the world, hear me. I come before you, one of your children. I am small and weak. I need your strength and wisdom. Let me walk in beauty, and make my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things you have made, my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise so that I may know the things you have taught my people, the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. I seek strength not to be superior to my brothers and sisters, but to be able to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me ever ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes, so that when life fades as a fading sunset, my spirit may come to you without shame.
All my relations. Daneto. Hi.
Aho. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you very much, Mary Lou, Dan, Smoke, elders that were here with us today. Collin Graham, thank you. Marissa, Kokkoros, thank you so much. It's just been an honor to have you all come and join us today and to present this resource spotlight. And with that, we'll remind everybody to complete the evaluation and to hopefully join us next time. For now, we'll say be safe and goodbye.